I read Chapter 6 of Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum. My chapter was titled The Development of White Identity. In her TED Talk, Beverly Daniel Tatum asks the audience to think back to their first personal experience with race. I think that sharing mine is a good way to begin the discussion. So I grew up in a small town that was predominantly white, but in 6th grade, a new girl named Ashley moved into my class. She was Jamaican and had the darkest complexion that I had ever seen before. I don't remember having any specific feelings about this, but we soon became best friends. I thought she was wonderful, and my family did too, but there was one thing that bothered me about this. Sometimes I heard my grandparents refer to her as the little black girl. They didn't mean any offense by this, but I think for them it was a struggle to see past the color of her skin. I don't believe Ashley ever heard them call her this, but it always bugged me. I sometimes still struggle with knowing how to refer to people. I know that people have many different defining characteristics and factors other than their skin color, but I'm not sure if it is considered offensive to describe someone in this way. Cultural identity is something that makes people different or associates them with others. So I guess it's not offensive, but this is something that I'm still obviously struggling with. Maybe it is connected in some way to the negative associations with defining people by their race. This is the first discussion question. More just for the hope of possible mental relief than from turning this around in my head than for the sake of the project, but here it is. In your opinion, is it offensive to refer to someone by their race? Does it just depend on what the person prefers, or is there some sort of norm that we're expected to adhere to? So in my chapter, the 6th chapter of the book, it was titled The Development of White Identity. And this topic is very clearly illustrated when Tatum writes the following. There is a lot of silence about race in white communities, and as a consequence, whites tend to think of racial identity as something other people have, not something that is salient for them. And this chapter is from page 94 of the book. With this absence of one exploring their racial identity comes a skewed view of other races. In order for a white individual to work through this, they regain a positive association with their race. In this chapter, Tatum shares 6 stages that people typically go through. Tatum cites counseling psychologist Janet Helm's theory of how white people can achieve a healthy sense of white identity from her book Black and White Racial Identity Development, Theory, Research, and Practice. This process includes the following 6 stages. The first stage is contact. In this stage, the individual's personal racial identity is not really recognized. They also believe that they are unbiased and free from racial prejudice and assumptions. Someone in this stage usually sees racism as an individual's actions rather than a system of advantages. While Tatum was teaching this topic, one of her students that was in this stage wrote, I was taught to recognize racism only in individual acts of meanness by members of my group, never in invisible systems conferring unsought racial dominance on my group from birth. The second stage is disintegration. This stage involves growth through social interactions where race is significant. Tatum says that this new awareness is characterized by discomfort. The uncomfortable emotions of guilt, shame, and anger are often related to a new awareness of one's personal prejudices and prejudices within one's family. To move past this stage, the individual will have to turn their discomfort into action, which leads to stage 3, which is reintegration. This by far is the least glamorous stage, and some wish that it was not a piece of the puzzle at all. This is where the guilt turns to anger towards people of color. The thinking behind this is said to be if there is a problem with racism, then you people of color must have done something to cause it. And if you would just change your behavior, the problem would go away. Which leads to the fourth stage, which is pseudo-independent. By this stage, the white individual understands racism but may not know how to handle it. Much of this uncertainty comes from a remaining feeling of guilt for being white. The fifth stage is immersion. This stage is about the white person seeking new ways of thinking about whiteness, ways that take them beyond the role of the victimizer. One way mentioned in the text is researching white people in history who helped fight for equal rights. Tatum states that it is at this stage of redefining whiteness that the feelings of guilt and shame start to fade. The sixth and final stage is autonomy. This stage is a never-ending one. After going through the other stages, the person will be closer to a healthy sense of white identity and open to new learning and ways of thinking. The chapter concludes reflecting on the future effect of this six-step process. A quote in this chapter says that though it can also be complicated and lonely, it is also liberating, opening doors to new communities, creating possibilities for more authentic connections with people of color, and in the process, strengthening the coalitions necessary for genuine social change. Which leads to my second discussion question. Do you think that this process could work for you? And what stage do you think you would currently be in, if any of them? So how does this affect me in the future? My new learning can help me in my future career of teaching because I can be more observant of how children find their racial identity and seeing how early negative or positive things could influence their racial identity in the future. So just as a reminder, here are my two discussion questions again. The first one is, in your opinion, is it offensive to refer to someone by their race? Does it just depend on what that person prefers, or is there some sort of norm that we are expected to adhere to? And the second question is, do you think that this process could work for you? And what stage do you think that you would currently be in, if any? Thanks for watching.